Hey everybody, and welcome to my first ever Total War Warhammer 2 replay commentary. I'll be playing as the Dwarfs today versus Brettonia. And since this is my first video, I'm going to go ahead and say that I have been playing Total War Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 1 for years. I have well over 1,000 hours in game. I love the campaign and I love multiplayer. I've tried to get recently harder into quick battles. And what I'm bringing you here today is a quick battle. I don't like to play the meta. I love to try different things against people who do like to play the meta, and I think that makes them pretty easy to counter. So I went ahead and did an anti-Brettonia Dwarf build today. Now I want to start by saying that when I picked Dwarves, my opponent messaged me GG RIP. So I had a pretty good feeling he was going to go with this type of build, a very strong anti-dwarf armor piercing build. He went really wide and really heavy on the questing knights. So I'm going to go ahead and go into slow-mo as I briefly go over my army, my composition, and why I picked what I picked, because this battle gets underway pretty quickly. Now I have a front line of Longbeards, a mix of great weapons and standard Longbeards to handle any kind of foot squire front line, which you'll see my opponent brought 4 of. And I have a small contingent of miners with blasting charges to kind of help break up the infantry charge. In a backline, you'll see defending my ranged units, I have Slayers, 3 standard Slayers, no Regiments of Renown, no Dragonback. They are going to help me fend off all the cav, and anyone that breaks through this pocket is going to have to deal with Slayers, just immediately reinforcing. And for my ranged units, I had a really good idea of what my opponent would bring, and I don't normally bring Rangers with great weapons in almost any matchups. I find that anything that they can do, the standard Rangers can do just as well. Their armor piercing values are really high, but their range is much lower, and they don't have the shields that allow them to trade with skirmishers. So I was really counting on my opponent not having any kind of range skirmishing, and I was very fortunate that that was the case. With my lore choices and my hero choice, I went with the Runesmith. I actually put him on his anvil to give him some mass, and to give my entire army a faction, kind of an army-wide magic resistance buff. And my Runesmith also has the same 3 runes, the Rune of Oath and Steel to give a huge armor increase. He has the Rune of Negation to give us a static 22% damage resistance, and a Rune of Wrath and Ruin, which is vital for both of these units. It's going to allow me to damage and slow these questing knights, who I see as the biggest threat this game. So let's go ahead and speed it up. So you'll see my opponent's coming forward, very wide formation with his questing knights in the lance formation, which is great for running down infantry. Now I noticed that my opponent had 2 mounted yeoman groups ready to flank me. These are units I'm not very scared of, because I went with a very strong defensive build. Now had he had a lot of range units and siege equipment, I was very ready to march forward and meet him. But seeing that he definitely owned the mobility fight, I went ahead and stayed put and changed up my formation to engage these peasants in the front line. You'll see a Rune of Wrath and Ruin, a Master Rune going off on these questing knights. We'll keep an eye, and another one going off on these questing knights. We'll keep an eye on them and see how much damage that does. You see the blasting charges and the axes going into these peasants. Now some people will say you shouldn't waste your charges, you shouldn't waste your ammunition on peasants, but it's my philosophy to get units off the field as fast as possible. These peasants, while they are soaking up this ammunition, they will not be around when our opponent's main force engages, and that'll make it a 1v1 fight with Longbeards versus Foot Squires, and I like that engagement. Now I took Longbeards because they have charge defense against large, and that basically gives them the defensive capabilities of, let's say, a halberd unit. These questing knights won't just be able to run straight through my lines and get right in. So you see here we shattered off these mounted yeomen with slayers. Now what I've done is I've made a nice little pocket for my Rangers with great weapons to go ahead and just pick apart. I'm gonna really prioritize the questing knights, and anytime I see them get within range of my Rangers, I'm gonna go ahead and take those shots. Opponent getting a little flank here, and you'll see I'm intercepting with these long beards. I don't think I'll be able to brace, so I'm gonna go ahead and just try and charge them in. It's a lot of fancy footwork. It's a lot of trying to micro these guys, and anytime they do get in the back line, the Rangers are great because with their great weapons, they themselves are pretty good combatants in melee. Pulling those slayers, I moved up to the front line. I'm pulling them back. Now I will say one of the mistakes I feel like my opponent made is leaving back the Fey Enchantress. Now she has abilities that not only let her heal, but she's also a decent melee combatant. Against the dwarves, she won't do any damage as long as you bring the Rune Lord and apply that huge magic resistance to your army. You'll notice her attacks are magic attacks. But what she does do is provide an aura, a draining aura effect called the Mists of the Lady, which only engages when she's in melee combat. So even if she was just here attacking some really low caliber infantry like these miners, she would be able to applying a draining effect that'd be really strong against all of these units. And instead she's just hanging back. Go ahead and take in some of these cool battle shots. Slayers and Runesmith just chopping up these spearmen. They're not really expected to hold. The real armor piercing comes in from these foot squires. These guys here with the shields on their back. Yeah, take that off. Longbeard's doing a little twirl. But yeah, my primary focus for most of this battle was really microing my Rangers to get the most out of them, and keeping my Slayers engaged with as much cavalry as I could. Yes. Yes. Get away! Now I love bringing Slayers in almost every matchup, bringing multiple Slayers, especially with a Rune Lord and Runesmiths as your lords and heroes. Their Runes of Oath and Steel give units about 60 armor, and Slayers are naturally unarmored. It's kind of what helps balance them. These shirtless guys, they have really high damage and they fight to the last man. They're an unbreakable unit, but their lack of armor is what keeps them from just destroying other units. And you stack that with a buff that gives them plus 60 armor, as well as, the Rune of Negation, which gives them plus 22 damage negation, and all of a sudden they're super tanky, and they just won't quit. So here we have 40 Slayers kind of fending off these two cavalry units, and the Defenders of Fleur-de-Lis, a Regiment of Renown unit from our opponent, the Knights Errant unit. They're getting into the back of this formation, but there's only 7 of them. They can't do much work. Our opponent's going to be trying to rally their retreating forces. Now I've got one peasant mob, looks to be chasing off some of my Rangers with great weapons that were compromised, but I'm going to be trying to bring them back to the fight, because what I have here is I have 2 pockets. I have one pocket revolving around my Rune Lord, and I have another one over here around my Runesmith. And they're providing those buffs. So here we go, the Fey Enchantress finally engaging, but it might just be too little too late. The troops really needed that support. Now, she was providing good healing to this frontline engagement. If you saw that green aura go off on these Brettonian troops, that's what that was. She was casting either a regrowth or an earth blood to really bring them back up. That's an advantage most races have over the dwarves, is their magic. Dwarves don't use magic, they use runes. They really rely on their gunpowder and ranged units, siege units, their artillery pieces to to get that kind of range damage in. You see the runesmith go ahead and kind of beating the heck out of the Fan Enchantress. She has to run. I'm doing my best this entire fight to rally my guys to bring them back. Slayer's still fighting. This is only a unit of 5. Still able to take out these questing knights. And since I've kind of shattered off this pocket, I'm going to go ahead and bring in pretty much the strongest contingent of guys that I have, and we're gonna have a big ball here. And the dwarves get really scary in the late game when they're able to pull all their units together from all the different corners of the map that have shattered or broken. And when they can get back under the kind of the command of their lord and these buffs, they're just super hard to break.
Attack the earth!
Shatter.
Going full tilt.
My opponent's going to try to pull back. They're going to try to regroup, which is smart. But at this point, there's really not much they can do. They just don't have the armor piercing necessary. They don't have the damage necessary to get through this many heavily armored dwarf units. It was a pretty good fight. I liked my opponent's strategy. Heavy armor piercing really enveloped the dwarven army. If I had gone for artillery pieces, there's no way I would have been able to protect them. If I had gone for standard range units, not enough armor piercing to get through the questing knights. So all in all, I really like my build. I like my opponent's build. I just think that their inability to get to my back pocket to really shut down my ranger play and of the lady is really what cost them the game. But otherwise, it was a great game. My opponent had to eat their words kind of at the end, but they were otherwise respectful. So good games, and I'll see you in another recording.